Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Purpose People podcast. We'd just like to welcome you as we talk brand. So I've got Danny Matthews, an absolute expert on brand. He's got some exciting announcements to tell us about as well. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's always good actually to see podcasts about purpose specifically, because I think it's sometimes an underlying or kind of fluffy thing, whereas actually this gives it a little bit of clout. So I'm excited.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing I'm seeing now is there are a lot of brands and a lot of businesses now talking about it more and more and more. And I won't tell a lie, but you kind of like, you look at it and you go, I was talking about this for ages, you know, but the reality is it's something that has just got lost in the quest for money. And I think for me, the whole podcast thing is allowing us to have these conversations and, you know, just almost discuss how we got to this point, and then also discuss what to do now we've recognized that we need purpose and what we do beyond. So from your perspective, just tell us a little bit about your story and, you know, how you got in brand stuff, because obviously that's quite a journey in itself just to get there.
Yeah, even branding in general, or what I do as a profession now, is a fairly new thing for me in the grand scheme of things. I grew up in a town called Coventry. I used to send people there to hang back in the day, which is tells you a lot about why I left. But I went to an all-boys public school.
Yeah.
And if you imagine a classroom of kids that when they're asked what they want to do for a living, you see a wave of like shoulder shrugs in the classroom. And I was the only kid that really knew. So hand went straight up. And I knew I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to create things. I knew I wanted to be creative, whether that was design or at one stage it was voiceover for cartoons. So that was a thing I wanted to do.
We're going to get you to do some impressions later.
Yeah, I imagine that would be a thing.
Can you answer the next question as Donald Duck?
And then... So I went through school kind of knowing what I wanted to do, but felt very restricted because the school I went to were going through the process of becoming a sports academy. Yeah. So when you go to an all-boys public school that's trying to become a sports academy, there's no way you're going to be a creative person as a job. There's no way people will encourage you to draw for a living. Yeah. So I took that as a sign more than anything, and entered the working world, and like many people, job after job after job, and ended up in financial services. And it was only through that journey, I guess, of being in financial services for 10 years. I ran a mortgage and insurance broker for some time during that, and decided at one stage that this wasn't what I wanted to do, or actually the way that it went is I realized that mortgages, or the mortgage industry, was broken. And I had to create something in order to fix the problem that I had, which was mostly based around the time it took to complete applications. So I created a proof of concept, essentially, eventually sold it to a company in London. And through that process, had quite a serious episode of burnout. I was paralyzed from the waist down and lost my speech for a short period of time. And, you know, there was a lot more going on than just that project I had on, but eventually it led to that. And only through that pushed me to take some time out and realize actually what I wanted to do. And I think it was my wife that was the first person in my life to encourage me to do what I wanted to do, what I loved for a living.
And it's an interesting one there because, you know, like it almost, when you hear stories like that, I got to this point of burnout. For me, it always is a reflection potentially of when you're doing what your purpose is. You put boundaries and stuff in, but when you're not doing what your purpose is, you're just not made to do it, if that makes sense. And you might want to work hard and do the right thing or whatever. Eventually, because you're not made or created that way, eventually it will harm your health because you're not meant to be doing that. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, it's the old cliche thing of like, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And I know it's a bit cliche and a bit cheesy or whatever, but in reality, that is true. There is a difference between going to work every day of what you're not meant to do and what you're going to work every day doing what you're meant to do. Yeah. And I'm not saying that I don't get stressed now, but they're micro stresses. Yeah. They're a difficult client, a difficult situation, a hard conversation with a team member. It's micro stresses, but you know that the path you're on is the right one. Whereas before, everything was difficult. Everything was hard. the stresses weren't just stresses. They weren't micro stresses. They lasted. They seeped into personal life. Like there's a lot around that, and I think they're so subtle. You'll miss them.
Yeah.
But doing what you're meant to do, the micro stresses mean nothing. You wake up the next day and they're gone. It's tiny. It's immaterial.
So you're paralyzed from the waist down, you said?
Yeah.
So you're paralyzed from the waist down. Were you in hospital?
No. So the trigger was that I got up. So I'll tell a bit of a story maybe.
It's a good place to tell it.
Yeah, exactly. So if you imagine that every single day I was waking up at maybe 4 a.m. I lived in Cirencester and between Cirencester and Birmingham. And so I'd wake up every day about 4 a.m. I'd commute to London. Sometimes I'd finish 10 a.m. midnight, come home at midnight some nights. And that would happen 6 days a week some weeks.
Wow.
And it was non-stop. And it's funny, sometimes people say, didn't you see the signs of like burnout? I'm like, yeah. And I ignored every single one because there was a lot on the line. So you just get on with it thinking that it will go away eventually, the project will finish and that'll be
Drink more water.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Drink more water or coffee or alcohol or any other substance to take the pain away. Yeah. So I did what I did every day. I grabbed some food out the fridge, a snack, a sandwich, whatever, threw it in the bag, laptop in, can of ginger beer was kind of my go-to beverage. I'd go to whatever public transport I was getting on, train, coach. And one day I was late. And so I parked the car I was in Birmingham at this point. I parked the car in Birmingham, ran to the coach, got on the coach, sat on the coach for 2 hours or so, got off on a tube to where the client's office was, got off the tube, stopped for a minute and stretched. And as I stretched and put my arms behind me to kind of push out my hips, give the back a little nudge, the bottom of my shirt was wet. And something in my brain triggered my entire nervous system. And I was like shaking, sweating, and I'd realized in that moment that the can of ginger beer had burst all over my laptop. And there was, even though I knew cloud technology, everything was backed up and all the rest, something in my head said, this is bad. Because I was about to go and present the final project, like the final thing.
Wow, okay.
And something in my head just said, this is going to be bad. And my first reaction was to call my wife. So I phoned my wife. I was in Lime Street in London, and there's these like big concrete blocks in the middle of the street. And I called my wife, and the second she picked up the phone, she said, "Hi, Dan, are you okay?" And something about her asking me if I was okay triggered me to not be okay.
Right, okay.
And I lost all feeling from the waist down, dropped to the floor, couldn't move. And I always pictured London as like a very unemotional place. So I thought people would just walk by, but there was 4 strangers that were physically dragging me off the floor to place me on one of these rock things. And I didn't know what was going on. I could hardly talk. My wife was like gone now. I'd put the phone down or whatever. And that lasted for about 20 minutes.
Wow.
Until I realized what had happened. Because I couldn't talk, I kind of blacked out. And I was really, even though I'd lost the feeling in my legs in that moment, it took about 2 months to really regain strength in my legs again.
Wow.
And I didn't know what was going on, but later realized it was kind of a burnout episode.
Yeah.
And later spoke to people like therapists and people, nutritionists and people in this field of work really that see these people often. And someone said that there's something about our bodies that talks to us. And you obviously realize now, but that is your body physically telling you to stop because it shouted stop at you so many times.
Wow.
And you ignored it. Your body decided that it was just going to make you stop. And that was it.
Wow. So did they get to the bottom of why? Was it just burnout and that
burnout,
was simple
nervous system broke down over time. And I don't know if it happens for anyone else, but I recovered fairly quickly in the grand scheme of things. Yeah. A couple of months or whatever. I was starting to feel okay almost straight away, maybe a week after, but it took about 2 months to fully recover. Yeah. But yeah, it's something I'd never experienced before and hopefully not again. I think.
So obviously burnout happens, and you obviously you look back now and go, yeah, the body was talking and stuff like that. So in that process of where you feel burnt out, where was the question where you thought, I can't keep doing this role, this job, this way of living?
It was immediate.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I saw burnout as my way out.
Okay.
So the second it happened, my brain went, I'm done. I'm definitely done. Yeah. And I literally called the client and said, I can't attend the meeting today, but you're welcome to the intellectual property, to what we've done. We were finished. It was the final meeting.
Right.
So spoke to my developers and just said, sign it over, whatever they want, transfer it to their host or whatever you need to do. I'm finished. I'm done.
Wow.
And that was the end of it. And I made a decision in that moment that it was that was the end. I was done.
So then obviously there's a window of time between you being done and starting something new. So when did the question happen then? You said your wife had asked you this question. Was it in that process of downtime?
Yeah, God. So for context as well, that wasn't the only thing going on in my life. My father-in-law had not long been diagnosed with lung cancer, quite severe. And we decided to move back from Cirencester to Birmingham to live with him for a little bit. And as all of this happened, we had decided we were trying for children. We'd been told not long before that it was unlikely we'd ever have children, and we were lucky to get some IVF to have our first child. And we'd found out that it had caught, and we were ready to go. It was it was good news after failed attempts. And so in that process, we said we want to move back down, because where we live is beautiful. It's the Cotswold Lakes, and we'd love to bring up kids here. And that was kind of always the plan. So we said to my wife's dad, my father-in-law, luckily he was on the up, and we were going to move back down. So we moved back down, and there's a strange thing in our area. I don't know if it's anywhere else, but you have to have a connection to the area in order to live there.
Okay.
So the village that we live in, you have to have a connection to around.
Sounds a bit like Hot Fuzz.
It is a bit weird. Yeah, it is a bit like that, actually. So we had to live somewhere nearby with a similar postcode.
Right. Okay.
So we stayed with our friends for a short time. So we had that connection still. And I was sitting at my friend's dining table drawing. I found myself gravitate towards drawing or sketching or whatever you want to call it. And I was doing it at the dining table, and my wife walked past and basically said, I remember you telling me you wanted to be a designer as a kid, like at school. Why don't you do that? And it was not only the first time anyone had ever encouraged me to do that for a living, but it was the simplest question you could have asked for my brain to go, okay.
Yeah.
And that was it. It's sometimes the simplest thing. And actually, thinking about it now, I do a lot of work with young people in colleges and university. I'm about to take on 13 for a project, 13 college students and a placement from university. And I think the reason that I'm so passionate and get involved with that so much at no cost, like at no payment, is because I think I can do that for others. I think I've learned over the years how to ask really good questions.
Yeah.
And I think it only takes one person and one question for one of these young people to can go, okay, I'll do that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a big driver with me that says we need to ask questions about purpose much earlier on.
Yeah.
And give children the ability to express themselves and lean into what type of education works for them a lot earlier on.
Yeah.
Because, the school system as it stands works for some, but not all. And so because it doesn't work for all, then just like you drive a different car to get to the same place, maybe you have a different way of educating to get to the same place. And so for me, it's like saying, there's schools out there, they're great and it does their job, but it's not for every kid. And rather than badge them the troublesome kids or expel them for results, is that we'll find where they fit and then educate in that way. And for me, that then allows you to ask the purposeful question. So in school someone's an academic and wants to do that just by the results. They smash it out in the park in sciences or maths or whatever, then it's pretty obvious that's where they're headed. But for the entrepreneur, can just go completely unspotted in that environment. So that's kind of where I think when you're working with kids and even in college or that age, asking them the question is a massive thing for me to get a decent workforce.
And do you have a belief that purpose is something you're born with or something created?
I have a belief that we're all created for a purpose, but it's up to us to find it.
Yeah.
And we have the once we found it, we also have the responsibility to live it out. I think that's part of the excitement of life, is to go and find it. But I think you are made with it, but we have to find it.
Yeah.
So
this is probably the toughest part of working with young people for me, is that I tell the story that I've just told you. And they all think that they have to go through some real hardship to get to some kind of purpose. And I try to tell them the message that's what happened for me. And because it's hard, I try and give them a message that they shouldn't need to go through that in order to find their purpose. But I did. And if I didn't go through it, I wouldn't have found it, I don't believe.
But then
eventually, maybe, but it wouldn't have had the same path.
But in some degree, you could argue that you didn't ask that question, so you just went and lived life or whatever, and you had this cataclysmic situation happen that got you to question. Some people don't even get that far.
Yeah.
Some people even don't survive. Some people just get so fed up and frustrated with life that they end it early and not knowing. And I think for me, that's the tragedy of not asking those questions. I think it's a statement, isn't it? If you judge a fish's ability to climb a tree, that's often the education system. That's why I believe it needs to change, and we need to ask these questions more often. It's funny you should say, like they think that they should feel that they need to go through a crisis to discover it. And I think it's not. I agree with you. It's not always the case. It's. I think from my background, because I'm like go to church and I've got the church background, whatever. Often, well, I've got to be a drug dealer to have some kind of decent story. I was a drug dealer and I turned my life around, and now I go and follow God. Yeah, it's an amazing story, awesome. But what about the person that's always attended church?
Yeah,
and so for me, it's like I think it's just making use of your skills, your talents and abilities, and being aware of them, and having the right people around you to encourage them. That dad who takes the 5-year-old and thinks he's going to be the footballer that he never was. Again, there's loads of that in our society. Rather than ask little Jimmy, actually, do you like football? Do you know what I mean? It's those sorts of things. I think we just need to ask those questions a lot more. And I think the inherent question that's part of our workshop we do is, what was it you used to do when you were a kid where you forgot to eat? And I guess from your perspective, it's probably drawing. That you used to draw and forget the time and spend hours at a time just doing that one thing. And then life happens and we just make decisions based on other people's expectations, and we end up in a place where we don't want to be.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. The fact that you're around people and you're asking those questions, because it's not happening enough, certainly from my perspective anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just segueing into kind of where you find yourself now. So you've made those big decisions, whatever, and you fall into brand. You're now drawing. So what happened then?
Yeah, interestingly, I believe from conversations I've had that I had a unconventional route into design. Yeah. So whereas many people go through academics to be a designer, I used to say this, I think I wrote an article on LinkedIn once, which was like how I got my dream job in 30 days or whatever, with no experience and no qualifications. Because when all of that happened, I had no idea how I would enter this industry. Yeah. I only had a couple of deep-rooted beliefs that weren't very good beliefs, which was design isn't valued. Yeah. I'll never earn good money in it. Yeah. All these things. Whereas when all of this happened, I almost had no choice. I had to try and find a way to do it, to almost fill the lifestyle gap that I'd created with this project I was doing that was paying me really good money, giving me a great lifestyle. Yes, it was a lot of work, but but there was a lifestyle gap to fill, and I had to fill it quickly. Yeah. Because of the situation we were in, having a child, all of that scarcity mentality kind of stuff comes along that changes your life. And so a couple of things I realized is that I didn't have the academic background. I wasn't a qualified designer. I'd never trained in design. It was just something I was interested in. I had no qualifications. I had no experience in a design environment or a creative environment.
Yeah.
What I did have is 10 years running a business and an experience with communicating with clients and people. I did B2B before as a mortgage advisor. I spent much of my career in B2B private medical insurance. So knew how to speak to company owners and get past the gatekeeper and sales and operations and a little bit of hiring and team structure and things like that. So, and I realized very quickly that design might have been my skill that I'd built over the years, albeit on the side, for want of a better phrase. But I had all this stuff that I think designers haven't learned and won't learn until they go and do stuff. Like, it's not something you can just read in a book, although, there's plenty of books that'll tell you, but you have to go and do it in order to get experience in it. And I had done it for 10 years. So I felt really comfortable going out there and figuring out what my unique proposition was, or selling what I was doing, or the only barrier I had to overcome is pricing. And the great thing was that I had nothing to lose at that point. So I played a game called Double or Nothing.
Okay.
And I said to myself, how do I increase my value, or increase the value of design through the value of myself? And played this game, Double or Nothing. So client comes to me, how much is a logo? I think the first logo I'd done was 150 quid.
Right, yeah.
And I said to myself, the next person who asks me for a logo, I'm going to double it. And so the next person would come along and I'd double it. I'd say 300 quid. And then they'd say yes. And I'd be like, what? This is crazy. And then it went 6. And then it went 12. And then it went 2.5. At this point, I'm thinking, this is crazy. How am I in communities full of designers that are struggling to get their next job? And I've got to this point quicker than most people do in 10, 20 years. And I realized that there was a lot more value to add to design if you just ask better questions about the problem you're solving, about what they're trying to solve, about their business, and got really into this concept of branding as a way for design to solve problems. And that's what I was really interested in, and that's kind of what led me into brand, I guess. Yeah,
and I think that's a natural thing, isn't it? It's that segue from the asset that is a logo and the actual execution. Versus the message, the story, the dealing with people's pain points, creating the empathy and adding value piece as well. And I think absolutely I found in the world was you had graphic designers that just knew how to execute and make things look nice. And then you go, well, why did you put the photo that big? And why is the copy like that? And because it looked, and it was always because it looks nice. It looks pleasing to the eye. And I find often they design very much for themselves, and then get very offended with the client if he wants to change stuff. And they often design one thing. So there's no options. It's got to be that thing. And what I realized is that as an art director, which is what I went into fairly early on, which is about conceptual and understanding the much bigger picture, always gave me the advantage over a graphic designer, because I was asking those much bigger questions around message. And the actual graphic design was method. And so I was like, don't get hung up on the method. Let's get the message right first. And so for the graphic designer, it's like, well, why did you do a headline like that? Or why is it like, it was now going, well, where's the call to action? Where's the hook? Why are they going to read this piece? Rather than just say it looks nice. And I think, like, with the background that you had, it's equipped you almost to become an art director, whether you realized it or not. Which was asking those deeper questions rather than just being an executor and a graphic designer. And I've been in that world and that space for a long while now, and you can see the difference a mile off.
Yeah, I've been playing with this concept lately. You see this 3 switches, which is like cheap, good, and fast, or whatever. I think the same applies to like logos, and I've been playing with this idea of like you like it, your audience likes it, or it works. Pick 2. And I think you can only have. It's only when you pick something your audience likes and that works that you can become confident about it.
Agreed.
this other idea of like your logo isn't important until it becomes significant. So you can get any logo today and you can pay as much or as little as you want for it.
Yeah.
No one's going to care until you make them care.
Yeah.
You have to create something significant that attaches to the idea of this symbol being attached to the idea that they've built of you.
Yeah.
Whether that's good or bad, it makes no difference. So over the years of working in brand, I've figured out that this isn't all visual, even though that's where people go, you know,
Yeah.
and the thing that their audience probably sees first should be the last thing you do, because there's all this stuff that you can use to create a great identity that people usually skip.
Yeah.
So, and over the years, I realized what they are, and that's how I created what I call brand confidence, which is strategy.
Yeah.
Like, what are your goals? What is your vision? What change do you want to see in the world?
Yeah.
And then the second is messaging. So that's your story. And most people get stories so wrong. I met a woman a while ago that I've been speaking to a lot more these days, called Rachel Savage. She runs Brand New Story. She's local to here, actually. And she's got an incredible take on story and how the world is changing around story and how you're telling the story.
Okay.
Because everyone sees themselves as the hero.
Yeah.
And whereas you are not the hero, you're the mentor, the guide, the person that helps them
You're
towards
the Mr.
a good
Miyagi,
outcome.
Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Exactly, yeah.
100%.
And she's great at kind of putting that into words. And she's a copywriter traditionally, so she's great at that. So message and story is really important. And I think the thing that most people miss is behaviors. How do we behave? So what are our goals? What's our vision or the change we want to see? How are we telling that story? And then how do we behave in alignment with that?
Yeah.
Because that's where you get problems with companies that say they do great things and that are B Corps and things like that. And then they do something completely against that. And everyone goes, what? And that's why people say that you can take a lifetime to build trust, but you'll destroy it in a moment because your behaviors aren't in alignment with the story you're telling.
Yeah, and that comes back down to seeing values as behaviors rather than just words stuck on the wall. You know, and for us, it's about if you can, once you've got those words and those behaviors in place, you can make your decisions by it. You know, and you can reward against it. You can hold people account to it. But it's powerful, and for me, the logo then symbolizes or encapsulates all that messaging. What I find interesting when we talk about purely logos, if you look at the fashion design, you know, like Burberry, Gucci, Hugo Boss, they're all pretty much the same, just say with different letters in. The typeface is almost the same now. You know, it's just Boss had changed recently as well. So it's like they've all got the same font type thing. But they carry different flavors and different messaging in terms of their brand and their values and the way that they operate. So, you know, to an observer casually looking that has no clue about brand, it's like, oh, they all look the same. Yeah. But they do have their own particular ways of doing brand and telling story and making decisions. Some are more sustainable, some are more like crazy, you know, in terms of what's out there. Yeah. But for me, there's a big difference between brand and branding. And I think that we don't communicate that enough, and I don't think people understand that enough either.
No, and I think if business owners look very closely at big consumer brands, P&G, Unilevers of the world, they'll actually find a lot of clues. And these companies are great because they gather so much data. They can often see consumer behavior before we can. They can see what's happening and how people are reacting to certain things. And it's the reason that we're starting to see adverts change quite a bit from like product placement essentially to storytelling. So there's a great example in Colgate where they all of their adverts used to be about white smiles and toothpaste and toothbrushes and all that kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden they create a series of videos called Smile Stories where there's no product placement whatsoever. And instead they're telling stories of people in adverse conditions, or they have a great story about Down syndrome children or young people and giving them jobs in kitchens because they're good at it. And the whole campaign is around smile stories and how a smile can fight adversity. And watching adverts and things like this is a really good clue as to how we should be changing as business owners and how we're communicating, because that's a really good nod towards like brand over everything.
Yeah, because sometimes I do that. Sometimes I go like walking through the Mall at Cribbs Causeway, or I walk through Cabot Circus if I'm ever in Bristol. You know, I just walk to observe what's happening. You can find it online, but what's being shown to you online is as a result of your search and as a result of your past history. But if you want to go and see with a clean eye, sometimes it is worth just going out and walking around and just seeing how brands are and how they're interacting. And, you know, like the big shift in brand is like around Red Bull, for instance. Red Bull don't see themselves as an energy drinks company. They see themselves as a sports company first, and then they happen to have energy drink as part of their products. Pampers have made that shift from just producing nappies to be a parental guide or parental hub that happen to produce things for your kids. Do you know what I mean? It's a shift where the brand is bigger than the actual product itself.
Funny enough, my business has made the same shift. And actually, I've never heard someone say it in that way, but I've seen it. And I think that's why I started to feel quite restricted by agency model and thinking about how this looks in future. So it's interesting. Observation.
And this is where we are. So like Creation, which is a brand marketing agency that's connected to what I do, the podcast is around purpose. We're purpose first that happen to execute in these different areas. And the reason why we haven't got Creation stamped all over it, because every other company I'm involved with is about purpose. It's just a different flavor of it. So whether it's networking, whether it's self-development, whether it's building software tools, they're all connected around this essence of purpose. And
brand by association.
That's the brand first. So when people say, oh, you know, Darrell Irwin brand, in some degree, it's not. Its purpose is the brand. I happen to be a face of it, but it's to say that you can build purposefully and win purposefully. When you know what you're building, what you're doing, you just bring the necessary tools to make that happen, and so therefore you can deliver on it. So my purpose is helping other people deliver on theirs. You know, that's how we've got to where we've got to. So, you know, we've been deliberate in not going Creation logos everywhere. But of course, it will be shown through the Creation stuff, because ultimately one of the first places of telling a story is you need brands, you need people that understand it, and that makes absolute sense from the alignment of it. But yeah, we're about purpose and helping people get there. And these stories that we have from the podcast is people pivot. At some point, people pivot in life. And from your story, from hitting burnout and going, wow, I've got to make a change here because I just don't feel fulfilled, to you know, a basketball player being abandoned in the middle of Los Angeles. There's crazy stories that come out of it, but somewhere they've all made that, whether it's conscious or unconscious decision to find out what they're doing. Goes back to purpose is in them, but they're just trying to find where it is. You know, and if I can help you on that journey, brilliant. You know, so tell us a little bit about what you're doing now, because obviously, you know, you've got brand confidence, and that's been your thing for a long while. But you're moving into some interesting territory within the Cotswolds, and bringing some things to an environment that's not really associated with maybe entrepreneurship and all that sort of stuff.
So brand confidence, first of all, is a philosophy, essentially. It's just a name that I gave it to try and explain it to people in a product sense, I guess. Brand confidence is a philosophy, and it really encapsulates three things. But the main messages of brand confidence are that everyone, as a person or as a place or as a product, has a brand already. It's a default. And as a business owner, it's really our duty to do things that give that a positive perspective or a perception in the eyes of the people who want to buy from you. So it's really important that we understand that it's already there. And really, we either choose to control it or we choose to leave it to chance. And that's really important. The second is, actually, I was thinking about this when you were talking about fashion brands, because it's very pertinent to this, is that whenever we make buying decisions in the moment, it's less about how we want us to feel and more about how we want others to feel about us. And I think the more we understand that almost meta kind of situation where we understand it about our customers. So our customers are going to buy from us, but they're not doing it because of something they want to feel. They're doing it because of what they want other people to feel about them.
Yeah.
Because that gives them a brand as a person, and that's how they control their brand. Then we would do a lot better. And the third is really around marketing, that most people have a marketing budget and not a branding budget or a brand budget.
Yeah.
And if you do marketing without branding, your marketing will always fail to perform at its best.
Yeah.
And it's why I see so many companies that I speak to them and they're like, everything's good. I'm like, well, why are we having a conversation? And they're like, well, the sales team are great. They're converting high. We're doing good. The leads are generating. We've got Facebook ads going. We've got TikTok running. We've got organic social media. We do lead mag. They do all the things. We're all, we have processes, so that the process is good. We know at each stage what our buyers are going to do, and we can fulfill a need at every stage. So what's the problem? And they just feel like they've hit a ceiling or a plateau. And the reason is, and the only thing that you can do to solve that is brand.
Agreed.
You can't throw money at marketing because you've hit a ceiling. You can't. Yeah, you can maybe train the sales team a little bit more, but the return on that is very low. Or, you've got your processes. So there's nothing else you can do apart from brand. And brand is really, like we said, about realigning your goals, telling your story in a different way. Sometimes that means changing the whole story of what you believe is the story. And then the behaviors, what are you doing? How are you acting? And that's the only things that can really improve the performance of a company. When I first had the burnout and transitioned, I was a freelance designer essentially, and I very quickly had this dream of having an agency and running an agency, and then very quickly, within only a couple of years, felt really restricted by the agency business model, and I think the reason for that is that I had ambitions to have other brands that I wanted to launch or own or get out into the world, and rather than waiting for clients to come to me, I would just create it. I would go and create a thing, a beer or whatever it might be, and I'll put it out to the world, and that's where I started to feel restricted, because everyone knew me as Danny, who owned the agency, and I wanted to get away from that. So I started promoting the agency about a year and a half ago, in a view to eventually figuring out what I wanted this to look like. And long story short, really, that I realised that a lot of my clients were early stage startups. They had these big ideas about changing something in the world, making the world a better place. And I knew that was an underlying thing for me anyway. I was always looking for something else, for something bigger, a bigger problem to solve. It wasn't just about this product or service or whatever it was. It was, what's the knock-on effect? So the question I often asked people is, in the transaction, who else benefits? Like when someone gives you money to give them a service or a product, who else benefits? And if no one does, we need to find a way to make that happen. So that started becoming part of a normal conversation with clients, and eventually realized I needed to change the business model to fulfill that. So now we are Short Story Ventures. We're essentially a brand first venture builder. Right. So if you have an idea, we'll turn it into a business, and if you have a business, we'll give it some legs to go and solve bigger problems as a force for good, if you like.
And I think that for me is the shift. I think in brand, that we lead with it, but we also understand that there are other businesses, or there is a business behind that brand. Because I was talking to an organisation. I won't call them out because they're really good, but what they're saying is they're seeing a whole load of people getting awarded money from bid writing. So they're winning those bids on Innovate UK. And the thing is, within the Innovate UK stuff, marketing and brand, they hate. I know that because we've done it 3 times, and that's been the feedback. And they almost damage your scoreline, even though the product was to transform brand. It's just as soon as they hear brand and marketing, they switch off. Now, of those companies that actually do win money, they then go. There's a couple of people that come alongside them, like governmental agency or funded agencies, to make sure they spend that money the right way. But in talking to those people, the first thing they say is they don't know what to build, they don't know how to build it, and they don't know how to get paying clients. And I'm like, how can you be awarding all this money? So he said they've got people there with 500,000 sat in the bank, 1.2 million sat in the bank. They don't know what to build. They don't know how to build it, and they don't know how to get users. And so what they do is they go, okay, we buy a load of devs and we build this thing out, right? Or we go and invest and we build this stuff with engineers or whatever else. We build this product. Spend all that money with no thought of how they're going to get users or how they're going to turn that into a viable business. Yeah. And, from what you said, I've seen that on an epic scale. And they're saying this is a big problem in that world. Mm-hmm. And we're talking to them at the moment because we've helped some of the people work out how to build an MVP. And so don't spend all that money. Keep it there. You've got to spend it, but don't spend it all. Let's just get some users first and get their feedback to determine what you're going to build. So, we're in that journey. But what I'm saying to you is that whole, what you put together is very, how do I put it? The foresight to do that is absolutely bang on. Because the reason I say that is bang on because that's what's needed. They don't just need a logo. They don't just need a nice story either. They need the other components to build a business as well, and no one's asking that. Yeah. And a lot of graphic design firms and those sorts of things are, it's like, thanks for the money, thanks for the 50 grand, see you later. And they don't care. And I'm saying, no. You're asking them, you're taking responsibility that most agencies wouldn't take responsibility for. And I love it. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's there's been a soapbox I've created for me to sit on over the last couple of years. And it's through my work with a Silicon Valley accelerator called Founder Institute. And so I'm director of the Cotswolds region version of that and do some work for the London chapter as well. And what's really interesting is that it's zero funded by public money.
Yeah.
So it's all privately funded. It's all through sponsorship and things like that. When I compare that to the 90% of other organizations that are similar, they're all funded publicly. Yeah. And what I've noticed is that when you go and try and find the businesses that have come out of that, with, funding, or that have launched a business, or that have grown to unicorn status, or whatever it might be, there's very little of it. So my conclusion has almost come to the fact that there's no accountability in that public money, which is why I'm so passionate about taking these ideas and making sure that they're ready to go before we even push into anything. The only exception to that is Tech Nation, unfortunately, which don't exist now. Yeah. But they're responsible for some of the biggest companies in the UK startup-wise, and I think a third of the unicorns and decacorns in the UK, and public money ran out and they had to close.
Wow.
And it's baffling. It's upsetting for the startup community because they were a staple of it. And they disappeared overnight because they had no that they hadn't over time. They ran for a decade, and at no point during that decade had they built a business model to self-sustain itself because it was reliant upon public money. And I think that's a real shame.
No, and I think that's the essence of brand, is that, brand and the integrity and the values and all the things that you harry is asking those questions. That is this sustainable? One of the things we talk about creation is creating sustainable brands. That's sustainable when, it's green, but also that the business idea and model that you're putting together is sustainable, that it can solve a problem, that people are interested in it. Hence if I'm doing a software company, we're saying build the product and get users first before me going, before you signing off the 50 grand build. Now, are there 50 grand bills or 100 grand bills? Absolutely. Have we got involved in that? Absolutely. Why? Because they got a track record. They know it works. They've been doing it long enough. It's all like lean, fast, cheap. And now they're like going, no, we need to scale this, and we know how to scale it because we got the data to back up what we're doing. Danny, thanks so much for today, Danny. It's been great. I know we could talk loads because we got a lot of alignment on brand and stuff. How do people get in touch with you?
Best way is LinkedIn. Just search for me, Danny Matthews, in the URL bar. I'm the actual Danny, which some people find humorous.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
And it's been really good, so really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Please watch my dad on Purpose People podcast and like and subscribe. Thank you. Bye.